Very warm welcome to Kingston Liberal Synagogue for our Shabbat evening service. In case you're new, my name is Danny Rich. I am proud to be the emeritus rabbi here. I was the synagogue's first full-time rabbi, serving from about in the mid-1980s through until 2000. Very proud, had a wonderful time here, brought my children up here, and think this is a wonderful community, which of course has changed and grown, first under Charlie Beginski, who I think may be with you tomorrow morning, and then under its current Rabbi Rene Fertzel. But I remain as fond of you as I always was, and thank you as the institution and the people in it for giving me a great 20-year start in the rabbinate. I think I'm now in year 33 or something. I can't remember what year it is. I was ordained in 1989, so that tells you how old I am. Anyway, in years. So, we're going to start with Psalm. Do we have any singing? I don't even know what the rules are now about singing. I'm just going to start us off, and if I do the wrong thing, somebody who's got music will take over or whatever, okay?
We're all allowed to sing and make noise.
Lovely. So let's try Psalm 95. Oh no, do we light the candles first?
Oh, yes.
So let's light the candles on page 69. Who's lighting the candles?
We need a volunteer.
So we need a volunteer. Who said I do it? Lovely, thank you, Sandra.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlek neshar Shabbat.
Amen. Shabbat shalom. Page 70 from Psalm 95. Page 70. Lechu naranana l'Adonai, nari al tzur, yeshenu nekadma fanav b'toda, bizmirot nari alo, ki el gadol Adonai, umelech gadol al kol Elohim, asher b'yado mechrei haaretz, v'to'afot ha'harim lo, asher lo hayam v'hu asahu, v'yabeshet yadav yatsaru, bo'u nishtachave v'nichra, nivracha lifnei Adonai hoseinu, ki hu Eloheinu v'anachnu amarito v'tzon yado hayom im bekolo tishma'u. And to page 76. Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boechem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni l'shalom Malachei HaShalom Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeitekhem l'shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei HaMelachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And page 91, Lecha Dodi. Page 91. Lecha Dodi lekrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi lekrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad ishmiyanu el hamiyuchad Adonai echad u'shemo echad. L'Hashem u'letiferet v'lithila lecha dodi lekrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha ki mekor habracha merosh mikedem nesucha. Sof ma'aseh b'machashava techila lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Hitorori kiva ore kumi ori shedaberi kavod Adonai alayich nigla lecha dodi likrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret ba'ala gam b'simcha v'tzola toch emunei am segula. Boi chala lecha dodi lekrat kala pnei Shabbat nekabela. The Baruch Hu, the call to prayer at the foot of page 92. Baruch Hu et Adonai ha'mevorach. Baruch Adonai ha'mevorach la'olam va'ed. Let us be seated. We praise you, eternal one, our God, sovereign of the universe, whose word brings on the evening, whose wisdom opens heaven's gates, whose understanding changes times and seasons, and whose will sets the stars in their courses in the sky. You make day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from light. You make day pass and bring on the night, and separate day from night. You rule the hosts of heaven. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. We praise you, O God, whose word makes evening fall. Ahavat olam ben Yisrael amecha ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim, otanu limarata. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shokbeinu uv'kumenu nasiach b'chokecha v'nismach b'divrei toratecha uv'mitzvotecha le'olam v'oed ki em chayenu v'orech yameinu uvahem nege yomam v'layla nege yomam v'layla v'avatecha al tasur mimenu la'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael, ohev amo Yisrael. The Shema, the Declaration of Faith, on page 94. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto La'olam Va'ed. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך, בשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לא תטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Let us be seated. למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני Elohechem. And over the page. ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב ולא מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. We praise you, O God, Redeemer of Israel. If you'd like to read with me, grant, eternal God, that we may lie down in life renewed. Shelter us in the shadow of your wings, for you are a God and a deliverer, a gracious and merciful God. God, our going out and our coming in, that now and always we may have life and peace. Baruch atah Adonai, aporei sukat shalom, aleinu v'al kol yoshvei tevel. We praise you, O God. May your shelter and peace descend on us and all who dwell on earth. Amidah, page 97. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Eternal God, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah. El Elyon, gomel chasadim tovim, v'konei hakol, v'zocher chastei avot v'imahot, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומשיר ומגן, ברוך אתה. מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מזריח השמש ומוריד הטל. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. You are holy, awesome is your name. We have no God but you. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. We praise you, Eternal One, the Holy God. The middle of page 99. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם, ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh Shabbat. We praise you, O God, for the holiness of the Sabbath. Eternal God, be gracious to your people Israel, and in your love accept their prayers. May our worship now and always be acceptable in your sight. Baruch atah Adonai she'otecha levadacha b'yirah na'avod. We praise you, O God, whom alone we worship in reverence. Let us read together. We give thanks that you, eternal one, are our God, as you were the God of our ancestors. You are the rock of our life, the power that shields us in every age. We thank and praise you for our lives which are in your hand, for our souls which are in your keeping, for the signs of your presence we encounter every day, and for your wondrous gifts at all times, morning, noon, and night. Baruch atah Adonai, Hatov Shimcha Ulechana El Hadot. We praise you, O God, source of goodness, to whom our thanks are due. Let us read together in Hebrew. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amacha, Tasim La'olam, Ki Atahu Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom, V'tov Be'enecha Levarech et Amacha Yisrael, Et Kol Ha'amim, V'chol Eitu V'chol Sha'a Bishlomecha. Baruch atah Adonai, Osei HaShalom. We praise you, O God, the source of peace. Now a few moments of silent prayer. There is, of course, a guided reading on pages 101 and 102. Yehil ratzon imrefi, Yehil ratzon imrefi, Ve'yon libi lefonecha, Ve'yon libi lefonecha, Adonai tzuri, Ve'galihi, Adonai tzuri, I presume for the sake of the camera I must stay relatively stationary, is that right? If I wander around, I will disappear and...
No, we can get hold of you wherever you are. With
Oh, excellent, okay, great. Well, friends, it is, I think, probably 3 years since I was last here, something like that anyway. It was pre-COVID, I know I came for one of your Yom Kippur services online, but... well, haven't things changed? We rabbis and we community members have got used to Zoom, and in certain synagogues I'm not allowed to move very far because the camera doesn't go that far. So walking between the congregation when you're preaching is no longer allowed. Whether we're allowed to responsively read, I can't even remember or not certainly for my generation and younger who didn't live through the Second World War, this is probably the major crisis that, if you like, that our society has faced. I can't think of one. I mean, I don't remember the Cuban Missile Crisis either, because I think it was the year I was born. So certainly if you're born after 1961, and there were some people who were born after 1961 here, this has probably been the most challenging societal event, and one that is continuing. And of course, for us rabbis, we have to try and, I hope, and think that we read Torah within the context of what we now call COVID-19. And I hope Rene has drawn your attention to the book of sermons produced by Liberal and Reform rabbis on COVID. I mean, I have 2 sermons in it. I think he has at least one. If not, ask him and he'll be able to get them for you. But I want to just think about tomorrow's Torah portion for a minute. I have no idea what Charlie will say tomorrow. I presume she's reading from B'Shalach. B'Shalach, which is the second word of the portion. The portion begins, Vayihi B'Shalach, in there, or as it came to pass, or when it happened, in their release. And it's as Pharaoh releases the children of Israel. The portion begins in Exodus 13:17 and runs to 17:16, and it's really the culmination of what really began in Exodus chapter 6 and will finish as we get to the end of this parasha. Well, it's interesting to think what actually is going on, but let me suggest to you a moment is this: a clash between the God of Israel and the Egyptian God, the king, the Pharaoh. And just give you the headlines of what's going to happen tomorrow, and if Charlie does it with you again, you'll be able to impress her with all your pre-reading the night before. But we begin with the people released into the wilderness. They then have to change course for one reason. The Egyptians, of course, change their mind. I'll come back to change their mind in a minute. The people and Moses have all sorts of responses. God responds. And then in the chapter 14, we've got this dramatic parting of the Reed Sea. This miracle, which, by the way, you know the rabbis are unhappy with miracles. So they said there were certain miracles that were created at the time of creation. The only miraculous thing is when they happen. So God created the parting of the Reed Sea. That was already in the creation. It just happened to come at the right time. And that's their way, really, of finding it very difficult. It's all very well to say miracles are great, except when they don't happen. Just think about challenges to the Jewish people or to the world when miracles don't happen. It's all very well when they do happen. When people are enslaved and seas part and the miracle happens, it's great. What happens when people are enslaved or in camps and in all sorts of other places where we don't want human beings to be, and the miracle doesn't happen? That's a theological challenge. That's just one of them. And then we get a little bit of the recap, and then we get the wonderful Song of the Sea. Maybe Charlie will share that with you, I don't know. Chapter 15. Difficult to read, especially to be read in a particular trope. And then we have a series of crises, of course. When is a Jewish community not in crisis? If it's not anti-Semitism, pleased to say it's a bit more of the right than the left these days, which makes me feel mildly more comfortable. If you've seen the Jewish Chronicle headlines today, for once it's not about Labour politicians. But the crises are bitter water, and then the shortage of food, and the manna comes, and the quail, and interspersed are the laws of Shabbat. A bit more about manna, what was it? Finally, more problems with water, and then the Amalekites. So it's a pretty event. This portion, like many of these Exodus portions, before we get to the construction of the tabernacle, which is of less interest to me personally, these are very dramatic narrative portions of the Torah, in which a lot is happening simply in the narrative. But there are also some great theological challenges. The first of which I've already given an indication, which is about miracles and how and when and they are to be explained, and what happens when they don't happen. The second challenge, of course, is the challenge of the plagues themselves. I come from a classical liberal Jewish family, so when I used to do Passover, we had no mention of plagues at all. There was no even taking and doing this. Just weren't mentioned of plagues. As it happens, it was my father who edited with John Rain, who edited the Liberal Haggadah, and for their reasons, which I have some sympathy with, they took out reference to plagues altogether, on the basis that how could we conceive of a God who, assuming, of course, that the Torah ever happened, but nevertheless, how could one even conceive of a God who, in order to prove divine strength against Pharaoh, or even to free the Jewish people, would kill the firstborn of all the Egyptians, as an example? And so, that remains a difficult challenge. But even more importantly, and that's why I made a reference to the changing of the Egyptians. Even at the last minute, the Egyptians changed their mind. Well, Pharaoh changed his mind all of the time. Remember, there are 20 references to Pharaoh and Pharaoh's heart being made hard. Half of them are Pharaoh hardening his own heart, and half of them are God hardening Pharaoh's heart. So if you see, as I think you do if you really look at it very much more carefully, that this is a clash between two very powerful gods for ascendancy, you still have to concede that the Hebrew God does rather hammer it home to the Egyptians in a way which presumably God or the authors of the Torah thought necessary. But it's this phrase I just want to reflect on for a moment: the hardening of the heart. Because you may not recall, and I had to check the verse myself, so you may not recall, but I'll tell you it's in Exodus 6:9. What is the physical description of the Israelites which will be equivalent to the hardening of the heart? If you're a rabbi, you can't answer the question. What will be you can in a minute. What will be the equivalent of, if you think about it, we've got Pharaoh's heart being hardened and all that entails. Do you remember how the Israelites are described at the beginning of this rather dramatic scene? It's a rhetorical question, I'll tell you anyway. It says they wouldn't listen to Moses, and it says, this is the reason, Kotzer Ruach. Now, Kotzer Ruach really means shortness of breath, literally, but is understood to mean that their spirits were so crushed, their ruach, their essence, their breath, their spirit was so crushed, they wouldn't even have a hope that liberation would come. And then you say to yourself, or I say to myself, because Torah doesn't mean anything to me unless I can make some connection with what's going on around me today. What connection does this have with where we are today? Well, I don't know what your family is like. I don't know what this community is like. I don't know what this area is like. I don't live in this area anymore. But, of course, we're all hoping that the 2 jabs, and I've had them, and my booster, no doubt, I know Israel has a 4th booster now, that sooner or later we'll either all have it or all get over it or whatever it is. And I work every week in the local hospital for a day, so I can tell you all about who's in with COVID. If you really want to know, they're unvaccinated people, 9 out of every 10 who are actually going into the ICU beds. But our biggest problem is that one person catches it in about 6 people, and then the other 5, so she or he gets isolated, and the other 5 are considered COVID contact, and therefore you can't put anybody else in there unless they've already had a COVID contact. So you're actually running short of beds, not because you're short of beds, but because you've got to juggle everybody to keep COVID contacts away from COVID people, and COVID people away from everybody, and the clean people away from everybody else. So, plus of course, don't want to frighten you, but Kingston ICU, which should have 80 nurses, had 25 down a week ago. Off, with pin and what do you call it, track and trace, and obviously genuinely ill and isolated. So, so although we probably got through the worst, there's still lots going on that we need to reflect upon. And that's not about looking back and seeing what we did wrong, of which I still believe, as I said at the time, the manner in which we treated people in care homes was probably us at our worst. I'm not seeking to blame people or give people a hard time at this moment. That would be investigation on that. But actually, I think we handled wrongly, on reflection, care homes in particular. But we've still got some way to go. And I don't know about you, but I've got at least one anti-vaxxer in my family who won't wear a mask, and I'm not wearing a mask now, but I'm allowed not to wear a mask when I'm taking the service. Won't wear a mask, doesn't understand about social distance, won't get vaccinated, has to tell everybody. It made me think about, back to our Torah portion, how difficult it is not to harden one's heart against those who won't be vaccinated. And so the first thing I want to say, what tomorrow's Torah portion teaches me is, we're going to have to work very hard not to harden our hearts against people with whom we disagree. By the way, it's a major problem in our society as a whole, that immediately there's a debate whether it's about trans people or whether we should knock down statues or whether you should love Boris Johnson or not. Immediately people go to extremes. And they take hard and fast. Of course we want people to have principles. But sometimes I wonder, in the communities where I operate in, which is the Jewish community and the left-wing community, I suppose you would say, we've lost the ability to debate things with a nuance. We take a position, we take a position on one side or the other, accuse everybody else of being this one or that one or not that one, and before we've opened our mouths, in fact, we've hardened our hearts. And if I were giving a message about what COVID should teach us and what the Torah should teach us, it should be that we have to try very hard. It's not always easy. I mean, I won't have one of my family members, thought she's one of Laura's, so that's okay. Won't have one of my family members because he's an anti-vaxxer who doesn't understand all these things. But it's a struggle to how we manage having good relations, and it's hard to practice what I preach. It's hard to practice not hardening one's heart when, in fact, one of my colleagues was in the ITU only yesterday, and the staff there have been amazing. They care if everybody comes through as you would expect without any discrimination, whether they've been vaccinated or not. But after an unvaccinated person had died, in addition to their obvious trauma of seeing yet another death, they expressed some anger, which is understandable, by the way. But nevertheless, somehow we have to try and remove that anger, to assuage that anger, if you like, in ourselves and in others, and make sure that we're not hardening our hearts. And the second thing, of course, that kotzer ruach, shortness of breath, is exactly what you get if you get serious COVID. You get literally shortness of breath. I mean, the COVID I didn't even know I had it. That's only because I was tested, maybe I even knew. But for some of you who may have had COVID, or know people who had COVID, it's a pretty serious respiratory disease for many people. It doesn't mean they'll die. In the early phases, we know lots of them did. But simply the ability to breathe, physical breathing, is hard. I've seen it on the wards. You may have seen it in your families. People desperately trying to get breath, until, of course, they then have to be assisted in other ways. But we have to also not only not be shortness of breath, we can deal with physical shortness of breath very often, but the other aspect of kotzer ruach is about being crushed, having no hope. And whatever traumas we've been through personally, in terms of our families, in terms of our nation and the world, we cannot allow even this may not be as bad as the Spanish flu or the Second World War or whatever it is. I'm not having that debate now. But the situation we're in cannot be allowed to crush our spirits. It cannot be allowed to, as the Israelites were, put us in such a position we don't think there's any future or any hope. Because that's what some people are saying, and Now, I happen to believe, it's irrelevant what I believe, I happen to believe this virus will eventually become like the flu and we'll have a jab again for it every year. But however society has changed, whether it's changed for the better or the worse, we have to pick up our metaphorical bootstraps and do what Jews have always taught themselves and others to do, to find a sense of hope and purpose in living. And we do that ourselves, we do that in our families, we do that in our communities. And our community, this one and others like it, may become even more important as a place where we say, however much we disagree, there's no hardening of hearts. And however much we become frustrated and disappointed and struggled, we will not become crushed. We will not become short of metaphorical breath. And we will breathe for the new day. We will live for the new generation who are joining us every day. As they do. My second grandson is a year tomorrow. I have to leave him with I'm not going to give up on his world. He hasn't got a choice about it. But apart from anything else, I'm not going to give up for my own world, and neither will I give up, and nor shall we give up for future generations. So that's the message that I take, which is a message, I hope, not of despair, quite the opposite, of hope. That we will find a way of not hardening our hearts and of keeping our spirits, I don't know what the opposite, uncrushed or uncrushed. I don't know, you know what I mean. And Shabbat Shalom to you all. The Aleinu, let's do the short one on page 519. 519, when you found it, perhaps you'll stand. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Baruch Adonai Elohim, Elohei Yisrael, Osei Niflaot Levado, Uvaruch Shem Kavodo Le'olam, V'yimalei Kavodo et Kol Haaretz. The eternal God shall rule over all the earth. On that day the eternal God shall be one and known to be one. May your love, O God, rest upon us as we rest our hope in you. All the nations of the made shall come and bow down before you and honour your name. Let God be praised. Let God be praised by night. Let God be praised when we lie down. Let God be praised when we rise up. Avidu Shabashamayim Yached Shimcha, V'kayem Melchutecha Tamid U'meloch Aleinu Le'olam Va'ed. Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed. Prepare to recite the Kaddish on page 524. And as we do so, we think of the following whose yahrzeits occur on this Shabbat. Julia Jacobs, mother of David Merkel. Jimmy Abramson, brother of Judy Parrish. Sarah Jane Lazarus, daughter of Betty. Francis Milesi, remembered by many of us. George Frey, father of Sarah Eves. Dina Saltzman, mother of Ruth Daniels. And Edith Saltzman, aunt of Ruth Daniels. Any others that are not on my list tonight? Of them all we say, Zuchronam Levracha, may their memories serve as a blessing to all those who are privileged to share a part of their lives. And as we recite the Kaddish, it fulfills exactly what I've been talking about, by which I mean it's a prayer which first of all says, you keep hope and faith when the going's bad as well as when it's good, and reminds us that life has value. Human life has value even if we don't know its length and we don't know its course, as we recite together. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabba v'yalma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kari v'meru Yehei shemei rabba mavarach le'olam olamei almaya Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'a v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithada v'yitalev talal shemei dekudusha barichu Leila minka bechata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechamata, amiran balma v'maru. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'maru. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'asei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al kol b'nai adam v'maru. May great peace descend from heaven, and abundant life be granted to us, to all Israel, and to all the peoples of the world. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated. One of the challenges of having been away a long time, and everybody wearing masks, and some people on Zoom, I can't see all mourners, but I can see that David Merkel is with us, so we wish you long life on the yard site of your mother. I don't know if there were other people who were mentioned whom I don't know. Judy's not here, Betty's not here. Sarah Eves, I don't know, so she's here either on Zoom, sent to her. And Ruth is not here, but they might well be on Zoom. So, are there any notices that I'm supposed to give?
Not this week.
No? Charlie's on at 11 tomorrow?
Yeah.
And is she on Zoom or live? I mean...
Same as it's not Zoom, it's, we go on Facebook,
Sorry.
YouTube and Twitter.
I don't know the difference, so... I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to social media. Okay, lovely. And great. All right. What would you like to end with? You want to end with an alarm? Okay, we will. I used to take quite a few services to Finchley, and I'd say to them, surprise me, but they never could. They always came with the Don alarm. Adon olam Hashem malach b'terem kol yetzir nivra le'ed nasa v'chepzo kol azay melech shemo onikra V'yachare kichlod hakol levado yimloch nora v'hu haya v'ove v'hu yeh b'tif aram v'hu echad v'ein sheni lamshi lo lahachbira v'li reshit v'li tachlit v'lo ha'oz v'ha'misram v'hu eli v'chai goli v'tzorchev li b'ei tzara v'hu nesi umanos li menat kosi ביום אקרא בידו אפקד רוחי בארישון ואירא ואם רוחי גבייתי אדוני לי ולא אירא. Shabbat Shalom.